Hello, and welcome to D-Class Cruisers Part 1. And if I do seem slightly quiet, well, that's because to record all the teaching ones I need to do for today, for SASC and for King's University, meant I didn't get to record the D-Class Cruisers till very, very late at night. So I'm going to be slightly quiet in the hope that I don't wake up the fluffy research assistant, as I don't want to put him out in the pouring rain. As is usual, the screen, which has all the slides, is off that way, so if my eyes at any point are pointing that way for too long, it's because I'm watching a screen and wondering what's going to happen next. Anyway, D-Class Cruisers. Evolution for relevance in steel. Which is kind of interesting because they don't really evolve as much as the C-Class cruisers in the interwar period. But the question is, do they need to? Did the D-Class have something else which makes them different? Well, this is what we're going to look at. This is the whole point of this discussion. It's to look at a D-Class and look at why they differ from the C-Class. What makes them them? And what makes them this sort of World War I Genesis cruiser still useful, still relevant in World War II? So, let's see, shall we? So, there are two options for their origin stories, and it's kind of funny because both of them matter. One is that post-Jutland, the Royal Navy looked at the C-Class cruisers which it was building and went, oh, not good enough, not good enough at all. We need to do more, we need to do more. And you, to an extent, get that put across in this book. To an extent. The other option is the Germans. Is that the Royal Navy was reacting to intelligence reports. And that's put across in this book. Precisely, it claims intelligence reports in early 1916 led the Admiralty to believe that Germany was constructing a new class of cruiser armed with 150mm 5.9-inch guns, and that it was probable that they would ship 10 or 12 guns, thus outclassing the C-Class. However, the German ships carried only 2 guns on the centerline. The remainder were on the beam, and therefore the effective broadside of the cruisers was not as heavy as might have appeared. Basically, the Germans were putting guns on both sides of their ship, and you can just about make it out in that picture of the SMS Kalush. I think I pronounced that horribly wrong, but SMS Kalashur? Kalzur? Yeah, sorry. If I make the computer play a noise so I can learn how to pronounce it, that would definitely wake up the fluffy research assistant, so I'm sorry. It's just on me and remembering my pre-GCSE German. So, basically what the German system was, instead of having guns down the center line, which could fire both ways, you had the guns mounted along. And the theory was, that they would be mounting 6 guns, or maybe more, 8 guns, along this, and 2 guns centerline, actually, usually at the stern in the German case. In actual reality, the classes produced, the Wiesbaden, Königsberg, and Conn class, have 8 guns, of which there are 3 mounted either side and 2 mounted stoneward. So they have a maximum broadside of 5 guns, but they can fire 2 forward or 4 rearwards, which would tell you, in the Royal Navy's opinion, which way they expect to be advancing. They are quite heavily armed in that regard. But for the Royal Navy, this actually isn't so much of a problem, because the Royal Navy at the moment is centerline building, putting their guns. So even the C-class could theoretically have matched in compared to them. In fact, if they had mounted the 4 guns each side and 2 guns on the center line at the rear, they'd have still only had a maximum broadside of 6 guns. So despite having 10 guns, you've effectively only got a broadside of 2/3 that. You're in many ways taking your ship back to the age of sail system, where it can fire one side or the other side, unless the enemy happens to be on both sides, in which case you're of course then in the benefit that you don't have to pick which side to fire your guns. You've got guns either side. So that is the advantage. It's certainly the more expensive route, because you've theoretically got a whole load of guns you can't use unless you happen to be surrounded by your enemy. So maybe for the Germans it's a sensible decision. Both these things happen post-Jutland. Both post-Jutland, the Royal Navy is looking at the C-class and evaluating them, and post-Jutland, they're looking at the information coming in from the German ships, the intelligence that, Germans have lost a lot of light cruisers. The Germans are building light cruisers. So I would say the actual origins is probably a combination of the two. And it probably depends on the historian's particular inclination as to which one they lean towards. Tempting, definitely tempting. But no, not my style. So, here is the bit of the nail in the coffin of just saying they're a simple progression of the C-class. Okay, we have HMS Cape Town, and we have the details for Cairo, which is the last set of C-class cruisers. And they are beautiful ships, as we've been over before, and they are heavily modified going into World War II because they have the perfect bones for being producing a light general purpose /AAE cruiser. But displacement is 4,200 tons in standard, 5,300 tons in full. Length 148.12 meters, beam 13.25 meters, draft 4.34 meters. Okay. They've got 40,000 ship horsepower, and they get 29.5 knots maximum speed, and they have a range of 5,900 nautical miles at 10 knots. Honestly, the big difference when you start going through Dana's, and that's the first of the D classes statistics, is she has had a little bit of a weight gain. 650 tons in standard, 730 tons in full. She's actually slightly shorter. She's not quite, about 4.5 meters shorter. 4.62 technically. Beam slightly wider at 14.02. So you put on 77 centimeters of beam. You can do a lot with 77 centimeters, especially when you consider it down the ship. And draft 4.42 meters, so she sits about 8 centimeters lower in the water. what you start to get from this image and these stats is a ship which is being designed for a slightly different style of operation. And it's most particularly revealed when you look at the speed is 29 knots and the range is 6,700 nautical miles at 10 knots. She's put on an extra 800 nautical miles of range. And then you go down 4 treble 12 to 21 inch torpedoes in 4 treble mounts and launchers versus the 8 in 4 double mounts of the C-class. 1 inch magazine box protection. Now that is definitely Jutland, because honestly that is Jutland experience going on. You know, you've got the same sides are over the machinery spaces, the same over the magazines. So basically what this means is on the spaces which have machinery, which is the core of the ship, there is 3 inch. Then the magazines are mostly mounted forward and aft. You know, in this way, the magazines for the middle guns, the guns sort of in the center line of the ship, sort of either side of the funnels, those are covered by the 3 inch. Okay, but forward and aft, those pairs, they are covered by the 2.5 inch, and then sort of disappears off a bit towards each point. But internally, the magazines themselves have a further inch of armor around them internally. So that means if you have anything which isn't a direct hit to the magazine, it's unlikely, unless they're engaging a far, far more powerful enemy, that it's going to do anything to them. Which is very helpful and nice and survivable. So they've got more range. They are slightly shorter, slightly fatter, which probably makes them slightly more maneuverable. It also means they can get slightly more places. And they have more torpedoes. Seems to me the D-class are being made for operations maybe beyond the European sphere, but also this looks to me like the Royal Navy is already starting to think about a post-World War I scenario and in return to policing presence duties. Yes, the C-class will be used for those. They're going to have to be. But in the nicest way, the D-class are just that little bit more refined for those kind of duties. They've got that much more range. They've got that much more torpedoes to counterbalance bigger ships on far distant stations. And they have that much more protection if they get into trouble. Useful ships. Right. So here's their construction record, and there's a lovely picture of HMS Daney there. For part 2, which will come out in hopefully about 6 hours' time, I want you to remember that HMS Dragon and HMS Durban are both built by Scots. I won't say why now, but they're both built by Scots. As you can see, it's quite an impressive program. You have 2 ships, Dauntless and Dragon, completed with large hangars on their bridge structures. All are completed with flying off positions over their forward weapons, their B mounts. Honestly, that doesn't seem to last long. We'll discuss that more in the next slide. There's also a pace of construction going on. If you consider how quickly Daney is produced, Dauntless, Dragon, Delhi, Dunedin, and Durban, they're all, well, up to Dunedin. The first 4 are all produced fairly quickly. They're almost kept up at war pace. Now, in the case of Delhi and the case of Dunedin, it's literally to replace pre-war cruisers which need to be retired after World War One experience. They have to be gone. They're becoming death traps. The ships they replace. In the case of Dene, Dauntless, and Dragon, well, as you can see, they're all almost completed in the case of Dauntless before the end of the war, so they are kept up at war pace right to the end, because Britain's not quite sure when the war's going to end. They hope it's going to end soon. They really do hope it's going to end soon, but the last three ships, Durban, Diomede, and Dispatch, well, they all have something slightly funny. They are launched by the yards which built them. But then those yards want to move on to peacetime civilian construction, and the Royal Navy has its own yards which have space now. So they're moved to Devonport, Portsmouth, and Chatham, respectively, and they are fitted out by the Royal Navy's yards, the Royal Dockyards. As far as I can see, there's no real difference in the fit-out quality, but they certainly do take their time with those three ships, and in the case of Diomede and Dispatch, this really does pay off. They really do have quite a long service. My plan is to record this, upload this, and then go to bed, so no iron brew, I want to be able to sleep. But water will keep me going for now. Right. End of World War One and the 1920s. Now, that's Dane, and she's sporting both her World War One livery and the colonial/Victorian rig, which she had when she was on various China stations out in the Far East. Dane actually arrived in time to serve with the Harwich Force. Dauntless would go to the Baltic for the Russian Revolution, be involved out there, and then she basically has a normal, almost home fleet cruiser career, and is just pottering around as a home fleet cruiser, doing the stuff that home fleet cruisers do, which is mostly exercising with battleships, keeping an eye on all the trade going backwards and forwards, and doing visits all around Europe to remind everyone why you have to be nice to the great big naval power which sits on an island off the coast. In a very subtle, friendly, diplomatic way. HMS Durban was sent straight to the China station, and when I say straight to the China station, she pretty much didn't even pass go. She was straight out there. And that was because of the rising power that was Japan. Much the same later with the county class cruisers and the town class cruisers and other things. Japan is a rising power. You have America also throwing her weight around in the Pacific. The major power in the world, as Britain was at this time, and still feels she very much is at this time, definitely. Well, no, still is at this time. Needs to make a statement. Now, if you deploy battleships and battle cruisers, that's making a very big statement and a very aggressive one. If you deploy your one of your most newest and best light cruisers in a fancy painting rig and she looks pretty and goes round. It's rather like the Great White Fleet, as the Americans did it, and as the British have been doing it for several hundred years at this for about 100 years or so at this point. I almost said several hundred years. It feels like several hundred years when you study all the history, but actually it's just about 100 years at this point. In terms of turning up and looking very, very smart, very, very proficient, and going, pay attention to me. You listening? Now, I'm only going to say this once. Behave. Now let's go have cocktails. That was pretty much the Royal Navy's approach, and it worked pretty well. HMS Dunedin and Diomede were part of the Royal Navy New Zealand Division. One of these books actually says they're part of the Royal New Zealand Navy. I can't remember which one. The Royal New Zealand Navy doesn't exist at this point. They are the Royal New Zealand Division. Royal Navy's New Zealand Division. And or Squadron. Sometimes it's called Squadron, sometimes it's called Division. I prefer the sound of Division. It sounds more respectful, really, of what it was, because a squadron is usually about 4 cruisers. But they have cruisers, they have sloops, they have all sorts of things. They're a far bigger force than just a plain squadron or a flotilla. But interesting enough, both of those ships went out in the far more martial grey. So far, I haven't been able to find out whether they changed colour at any point or then returned back. But most of the pictures I find of them, they seem to be in the variations of their grey. Which might reflect the New Zealand government's belief on the matters of what their ships should be painted. And it might have been a nice way for the Royal Navy to differentiate which ships were New Zealand Division and which ships were China Station out in the Far East when they were doing operations together. So you've got, and now HMS Dispatch is also dispatched out there. 4 brand new, top of the line light cruisers. Pretty much, if we go back, half of the light crew of the brand new class made are in the Far East. What does this remind us of? Oh yes, the county class get deployed out there, and of course the town class find themselves in the Indian Ocean, and HMS Birmingham, of course, is famously in the China Squadron. It's amazing how these patterns repeat. The latest, greatest, and smartest of light cruisers appears in a place where you need to do deterrence, because they're just the right sweet spot at the time of enough firepower, enough presence to act as a deterrence, but not so much that they actually stoke the fires or explain to people how weak you are because you can only deploy 2 battleships. As alluded to, most of the ships lost their flying off stuff by 1928. Honestly, it was never really that successful in the class, and it was considered a pain. Also, most of them by this point have been upgraded to 3 high-angle 4-inch guns for AA defense. They've replaced the 2 3-inch ones, and the 4-inch, and a third 4-inch has been mounted in some slight variation, but mostly between the X and the Y mount on the same level as the X. Mostly. There's also some pictures of them having depth charges and other things fitted. But that seems to be not completely a fully class-wide thing. They seem to be developing and working out what they're going to use these ships for as times evolve, because the trouble is, honestly, their cruising speed of 10 knots is good for World War One technology, but is rapidly by late 1920s, early 1930s outpaced as a cruising speed, and that's their main trouble. It's sad, really. It's their main strength post World War One when the war finishes, and it's what's deciding them as, to be the imperial policing vessels. But it also becomes their main weakness when it comes to further development. There again, the C class were just as bad, so, they got developed. Well, so will the D class, but that's in part 2. Books used for this. I'm going to have the same slide in both parts because I know how my viewers seem to enjoy listening to about the books. I will have to say that one of these I've opened least, in that I got it out, including the picture, because frankly I thought it should be in there, and did have a look through it, is Jane's. The Royal Navy in Focus, 1930 to 39, is a lovely book. It's basically an academic picture book, and it works very well. You mostly will know warship camouflage. The pictures of that have already been used in this. And then we have Warships and Submarines of World War II, the Military Handbook Encyclopedia. Pretty cool. I'd say mostly cruisers of World War II and International Encyclopedia has been what I have been using to start off this and organize it. Mainly because it's so lovely laid out, that book. I don't agree with everything they say in it, but they do have some very good, interesting ideas, and they do have it well laid out. And that's useful. And of course, sitting straight in the middle, Norman Freeman's British Cruisers, 2 World Wars and after. Just a load of wasted heritage. It's terrible. Anyway, next slide. So, this is the July themes. We have Back Pocket Cruisers on the 2nd of July. I'm going to keep touting that one because it's my book. Although it's not going to be the full book, of course. It's just going to be me chatting about some highlights from it. But it's something stuff. Because I keep talking about tribals, battles, and darings, I felt I should do something. Sounds funny because it's kind of self-serving, but as a bit of to say it's as a reward. But in many ways, it's a thank you for putting up with hearing me gabber on about them so often. I'm also looking forward to the Patron on the 6th of July one, because in Happy's, what stuff would you put in a warehouses at the end of World War One for World War Two if you were in command, and why? That's going to be some cool stuff. I've been looking into a lot of that. And I'm also, basically, I'm looking forward to all of them. They're all going to be cool. Again, so much fun in this one. So much fun. The Patrons won Indian Ocean from 1941 to 43. 2 years of interesting stuff. Making Mare Nostrum a Hollow Jest and the Pre-Tribals. They're going to be fun ones. I've got some books on order for the Mare Nostrum one. It's basically been an excuse to buy some submarine books. Well, some more submarine books. I only had like 12 or 14 of them. 12 pure submarine books. A couple more which are semi-submarine books. And where else can you find me? Of course, as I said, this is part of my professionalization bit on this thing. I should also probably put academia.edu, my account, on there, but
if you want to find me, you can Google that one. That's easy enough. Twitter at AC_Naval History. Patreon, AC Naval History, and Global Maritime History. There are some actually really cool articles up there, and I'm not talking about mine. Mine are good. I enjoy Tsingtao especially, but there's some also HMS Dorsetshire. That's an article I enjoyed writing. That was fun. And back to the beginning. So, I hope you've enjoyed part 1 of an introduction to D-class cruisers, the evolution for relevance and steel. And I hope you'll look forward to part 2 when it comes out. And will join me in, well, it'll be 12 hours from the release of this video, but possibly less than 15 hours at the moment for the live. Take care and see you soon. Bye. Thank you to everyone for watching.